All right, welcome back to the Medium Cool Show. I'm your host, Felix, and today we're once again joined by Jake Mueller from the Cinebums podcast.
Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah,
How many times have I been on now?
Well, you're just a regular now. Like, it's a countless time. You're kind of like a part of it now, you know? Like, whether you like it or not, like, you're kind of
I'm forced into it. I got stock in the Medium Cool Show.
Yeah. Well, we kind of have, like, I think we're kind of carving out a little, like, spot for you. You and I talking about, like, horror stuff, like, grindhouse stuff, like, B-movie. And also you, like, come on the show and Jack's here. Because, like, Jack and I talk about more, like, art house, more, like, classical. I don't know how we would describe it. Just, like, Jack and I will talk about everything except for, like, horror, B-movie, or like, fucked up shit. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Like, so I'm filling that void for you.
Yeah,
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, because I love I like the fucked up shit just as much as like the deep art house stuff.
Yeah, we got it. We talked about that on our horror binge, like the cult movies.
Yeah,
you know, we both really appreciate the sort of esoteric genre movies and grindhouse stuff a lot. So yeah, I'm happy to do it, man. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, and I guess like today's interesting because we're talking about some fucked up shit, but that's also art house.
That's true.
I mean? We're talking about a Criterion.
It is on the Criterion collection. I own it.
Yeah, and this movie is like, it has a reputation. It has like a really, really big reputation. And the movie we're talking about today is Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, written and directed. Well, it's based on a book by Marquis de Sade,
right?
From I think it's either like late 18th century, early 19th century. Pier Paolo Pasolini wrote the adaptation and directed the movie. It's almost like this movie is talked about more than like people who've actually like seen it, if that makes sense.
100%.
Like a lot of people, like most people, like people talk about it more than like they've actually seen it.
For sure.
I get that like vibe, like that impression from it.
I had the same impression for many years before I saw it just last year. And it was kind of this like fucked up badge of honor. You know, if you've sat through Salo, you've experienced some really grotesque and just like honestly punishing imagery.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say real quick, I saw this movie for the first time in theaters at Brain Dead Theaters in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And really optimal way to view that film with a crowd, because I feel like we were all sort of experiencing the same grotesqueness.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched it with you, which is kind of my frame of reference now, I got more out of it just in terms of ingesting what the movie's kind of saying and things like that, because it is like it has a lot of intent and purpose with the grotesqueness, so I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah. So what's like your relationship like with this picture? Would you say now that like from like the first time you watched it to like now, like because you obviously saw it the first time and it made some sort of impression on you because you bought the Criterion for it, you know?
That's true.
So you've seen it twice now. So like, well, how do you describe like your relationship with this film? Like,
that's a good question, because it kind of has an overarching sort of thing to where you described it perfectly, where we all had a perception of this movie before we even saw it.
Yeah.
And seeing it in a theater kind of felt like a roller coaster ride.
Oh, man,
just in terms of like all of us, you know, screaming and just kind of gagging, you know, people were being outlandish. It was like a really fun experience. So I really valued that group experience. Kind of, I didn't necessarily like the experience in a really traditional way. It was more, it felt like I got through, you know, like a challenge, I guess, quote unquote. And it sounds like really mundane. But I bought the Criterion mainly because like I feel like the movie had a lot under the surface. And this movie's like deeply hypnotic to me. Like I was really drawn in.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the power of Pasolini, to where he kind of lures you into this hellscape. And so now I feel like my relationship with the movie is that I'm disgusted by it. Because we'll get into it. When we watched it, we both kind of left feeling very just drained and kind of, I don't know, just not feeling great about the world. So I really do think this movie's great. But I don't think I'm going to watch it for a long time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you want to like describe like the situation of like how we watched this the second time?
I can't wait. I was looking forward to that. So I think I came over to your place where we are right now on this couch, and we threw it on at like 2 p.m.
Yeah, it was like in the middle of the day.
And basically I had to go to work afterwards. I remember we were both I just had this just feeling, like a lump in my throat sort of feeling. And we were both kind of sitting here just like letting this excruciating imagery just happen to us. But that's part of the experience. But it's just like right away I'll say watch this movie at night and not during the day when you have other shit to do.
Yeah, like we got like both like went on our like our own ways after the movie, and I think I had like lunch afterwards, and I was just like,
Yeah.
I just felt like disgusted. And I think like this movie, especially like online on YouTube, has like been talked about a lot, you know. And I think it's kind of like, you know, we could talk about like what happens in the movie, you know, but like so many people already know about it. It's almost kind of like it's almost like we have to describe our own personal
Exactly.
like way and like what we feel like it's about, and maybe like give more of like a background of like what he was trying to like say with this. But basically, the Salo is like about these group of like four libertine high like who the fuck are they, like these four.
I mean, they represent fascist Italy.
Yeah, they're like super high class, like high officials in like in Italy. They fucking have this house in the countryside somewhere, and then they basically force these like group of, they like go out and find like these group of like however many
Yeah.
young,
Like teenagers.
yeah, like young people, like men
Mhm.
and women, and they like first have to inspect them for like any
Yeah.
imperfections, and if they have any, like they'll kick them out, and that's how like they find these kids and they bring them to this like big ass countryside house where
Shit goes down.
yeah, shit goes down. I guess there's certain levels to it. First, like there's the like they isn't there's like chapters in the movie where
Mhm.
it's like the circle of
Right.
bread, the circle of brown, and then like circle of like death or hell or something like that.
Yeah.
Like they have like certain, like one is like a sexual
Yeah.
level where they make them do a bunch of like, there's a lot of like,
There's orgies. They're watching them having sex while they pleasure themselves.
yeah,
To me, like those levels you're talking about, they're almost this sort of ritualistic approach to curing their kind of woes. They're experiencing pleasure that they feel like they deserve, like it's a God-given right. And I
yeah,
feel like the levels are very specific in like cleansing this sort of urges they have, and they're all like deeply fucked up. And the last one is like lacerations, like cutting people's tongues off, death,
yeah, torture,
torture. Yeah.
yeah.
So
That the ending fucked me up the most.
yeah,
I
I
think
would say
the
so.
ending is like
Yeah.
the most fucked up part of the whole movie. Like
Mhm.
obviously the most notorious part about the film is like the shit eating
Mhm.
sequences, which is really gross too. But
Really nasty.
yeah, that's like what the movie is like really talked about. Like that's why it's notorious, is because of like the poo shit in it.
Poo poo. Almost as like I would say a punchline to when people are talking about, oh, it's in the Criterion Collection, just guys shoveling chocolate shit in their face.
Hmm.
But when you watch the movie in the context of what's going on, it's like deeply fucked up and perverse what's going on.
Yeah,
Obviously, and the power dynamic within this home, then how it develops is so interesting to me because like a lot of the kids, it feels like they're going along with it and they're kind of accepting their fate while others are kind of like trying to escape it, and it's kind of like
yeah,
it's like this whole mentality of like kind of luring these kids in and manipulating them as they're just torturing them, and it's just oof,
yeah.
it fucks with your head when you're watching it.
Yeah, it's definitely a critique and on like the fascist regime and consumerism, in his like critique on like modern consumerism in Italy,
Yeah.
because he was like really valued like the traditional Italy, and he feels like after World War II, after like modernism and shit, like
Exactly.
everything got like fucked up, and this is kind of what consumerism brings, like because he was like a, you know, a Marxist,
Yeah.
you know, so he was talking
Absolutely.
about, he was like what, like, you know, pleasure and like taking things in too much,
Yeah.
like you have
Excess. Yeah.
yeah, it's like excess. So like if you're at the height of power and you have like all this like shit, you can have anything you want. The level of pleasure you get from, let's just say, like, you know, having sex with like someone like normally, like consensually, like
Mhm.
that's like your baseline. And like if you can have all the sex you want, it just becomes like really normal, and like it's not like pleasurable. So you got to like start adding things to
Yeah.
it. Pasolini's depicting like the maximum version of pleasure and like the most
Yeah.
fucked, like what you could, like the most fucked up level you can get to
Yeah.
if you're like can have anything you want. Like this is like the most depraved shit you can get
Totally.
is in this movie. Film is like, oh, like what if like someone who all of like the depraved, like they could do anything they wanted to like someone. And this
Yeah.
is like what's depicted.
It's like
in the film.
maximalist of just excess and the idea of greed, and like that's brought on by like classical fascism, like this post World War II Third Reich era kind of thing. Because like even them rounding up these kids is almost like Hitler-esque, examining them, and they kind of treat them like cattle for their own benefit of pleasing themselves, and like that, like you said, like it is. There's no ceiling to their pleasure whatsoever, and that's like what's so disturbing about the whole thing. And it's kind of, it plays to the time, but also to, you know, stories you hear in contemporary culture of just billionaires and
Yeah, exactly. Like
people
everything
that are
that's
just
coming
taking
out.
what they want with
Yeah.
no repercussions, and that's what this movie is.
Yeah, like everything I'm hearing about like Puff Daddy now that's coming
Yeah,
out, like that's exactly like what I think about when I think of like someone who came into too much power and experiences too much pleasure and gets what they want all the time, and they're just like upping the ante more and more and more, and they just like have people like they just like the most fucked up shit. For someone like you and I, like just normal ass like dudes, like whatever, like normal people, like you wouldn't think to just jump to that level right away. It's like a slow build up, and I think people they'll like write off this movie just to be like as shock value, but really I think it actually has like a message to it, and that is like the message. Like this is what happens when people come into too much power and influence, and like they're unchecked, like in like fascist Italy, like just like totally corrupted, depraved. In, you know, strong nationalist like fascist regimes, they want to have like everyone be like perfect. They want to get rid of anyone that's like, you know, different or like disabled or whatever.
Right.
But then in the film, they find all the people that like are perfect, all the kids that are perfect, and then they fuck them up.
They
like
make them imperfect.
Yeah, they like fuck them up, which is just like
that's
really,
the irony of like what his view on fascism is, that they think they're cleansing the world of its evils, but they're inherently making it more evil with just like perfectionism, and kind of they're just how unrelenting they are with capitalism and just world domination and all of that stuff. Sort of that's what it's kind of just like encapsulated in this 120 days that we see on film. And I do want to say, like, I think a lot of people's criticism of this movie is that it's repetitive and it's not, the characters are generally like one note, specifically the fascists. But like to me, that's effectively like what we're talking about, is that they're so one-sided and misguided, and they're so tunnel vision to like this particular just perverse way of thinking, and the repetition of it is kind of driving home the point that fascism's like a unrelenting force that was that's still like, you know, prevalent in a lot of countries and everything. So to me, it's like that's not a valid criticism. It kind of what you're saying, like how it's just not grotesque torture for the sake of grotesque torture. I feel like Pasolini had a clear vision with this movie personally.
This movie is like super famous. It's famous, one, because of the subject matter inside the movie. It's famous because of like what it's about, like actually what, you know, what it's actually like tackling, like outside of just like the subject matter. And then it's also really famous because he was fucking killed pretty much over it. He was murdered
for this
like
movie.
after he made this movie. I think even before it was like released, maybe like a few weeks after he like finished filming, maybe, or I don't know when exactly it happened. But apparently, like the first story was that like his gay lover like killed him, but then recently, like not even like maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, like they found they did a DNA. His family did like requested a DNA scan or something of like his clothes, and they found that there was like no DNA from the gay guy, his gay lover, and there was like six other men that was like on his like blood from like six other guys. So he was actually like, it was actually like a conspiracy, like someone like he got killed by some sort of like anti-communist like terror, something, I don't know like what, I don't know if they know who actually like killed him,
like an anti-Marxist sort of terrorist group would do something like that.
Yeah,
it kind of drives home the point of his film in a way. It's like this free speech sort of and this overarching power over Italy at the time, and a lot of countries still, like they were trying to censor him, and they quite literally did, you know. You can't get away with calling us out and making us look foolish, because he does. I mean, like all the characters in the movie are like incredibly foolish and dumb and kind of, you know, consumed by this excess, like almost, you know, in the form of like animalistic behavior. Truly is.
I haven't seen any of his other films, but I know that he was kind of like had a lot of like he liked depicting like working class like people. Like Akatone is about like a pimp, like a lower class pimp, goes into that, and he also worked with like Federico Fellini. Like he wrote, he has like a writing credit on La Dolce Vita, I think he has some other stuff. I forgot what it was, but he was definitely a part of that like Italian neo-realist movement.
Hmm.
You know, like post World War II
Yeah.
type shit. You know?
Like Vittorio De Sica type thing where it's very empathetic towards the working class and kind of denigrates capitalism to see it's like destroying the common man and just kind of sucking our souls out.
Mhm.
I feel like Salo is like the epitome of what all those guys and like the very unsubtle version of what all those guys are trying to say is that just the looming control that these people have is just destroying the world. And yeah, that movie's powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it really does. He pushed the boundaries. I think he kind of opened the doors for like censorship as well
Yeah.
during his career in like the 70s. I know his other movies are. I mean, this one is like his most fucked up probably, but I know his other
Mhm.
ones are kind of like sexual and also have to do with like poo and stuff. Like his like Arabian Nights trilogy or whatever. Like I think he like the Canterbury Tales is like there's like poo in it again and like
Just a
sex
common
and
thread of poop in his
yeah,
movies, I
but
guess.
he was a bisexual. I think he was bisexual or gay. I don't know what it was. I think he might have been bisexual.
Very progressive for
Yeah,
the time
so
being.
yeah, he was radical. Like he's
Very
really, really
radical.
radical. Like I think he was just through with everything. Like I think he was just like totally like did not give a fuck at that point because he just felt like society was ruined.
Hmm.
Like he felt like everything that Italy had done up until that point was just totally went down the drain. Like all of like the history of like like the Romans and like the Colosseum and like even like yeah like ancient Rome and then like the Renaissance and then like all of that like all that culture is just like
It's wiped
was just
off.
like wiped off. He felt like it was just like done.
That's
so
true.
he just
Yeah.
felt like oh I'm just gonna like kill myself to like make a point that like this shit's all like fuck now and he didn't give a
Mhm.
fuck. And then he kind of became like this sort of like martyr.
Yeah, he's like a
figure.
martyr figure. Like Yukio Mishima has a similar kind of arc where he kind of
Yeah.
he said what he needed to say and encapsulated all of his feelings in his art and kind of a suicide note sort of thing.
Pasolini is a guy that people know in Italy. People who aren't super into film, like they'll if you say oh Pier Paolo Pasolini, they'll oh yeah like they know who he is even if they haven't seen his
I can
movies.
imagine.
Like they know who he is. Like he's actually a name compared to like maybe like other Italian
maybe
filmmakers.
yeah.
That maybe like they're
Francesco Rossi or De Sica, maybe not as much, but like
Yeah.
because he's like a martyr figure.
No, Pasolini's really
Yeah.
famous. Like, and still even today, like people still talk about like this movie. Like, really, like people still talk about it. Like, you see like all these like YouTube videos about it.
Mhm.
Like,
It did. It made shockwaves, and not even just cinema, but just like
Yeah.
culture in general. So it's
it has like that reputation of like I just watched the most fucked
Yeah.
up movie ever. But it's not just that. Like, yeah, it's like the most fucked up movie ever, but it's like also has like other shit to it. It's not just like some shock value.
of course
Like it's like written off for sure. Like in that way. Like, is it worth like? You were gonna say something. What were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna say kind of similar what you were saying though about the perception of this movie is kind of all wrong because like I think I would not have liked this movie if I'd watched it earlier because I think we talked about this the whole notion of watching really fucked up and grotesque movies like in high school for this curiosity factor and this movie always came across my like lists and things on the internet YouTube videos or what have you and I never watched it but I feel like people watch it too young or they have the perception of it is just all wrong that it's supposed to be like this kind of fun house of gore and just sex and debauchery but everything what we've been saying, I think, is much more of the appeal of it to me, and what it represents. In terms of Pasolini's impact on the world. While I do think this movie is very just fascinating to watch on that level, I don't think it works as a gross out fest because if you go into it thinking that, you're going to be sorely bored. You got to ingest it and kind of have some context.
Oh yeah, the context. If anything, you should be looking at the context more than the like actual. Even though like that movie, like I mean, we haven't even talked about like the way it's like shot and like how it's made, but like it's not, obviously it's like really well done. Everything's like really well done and like shot, and it's very artistic. He was an artist at the end of the day, and like a political figure.
I think even some of the orgy scenes and them eating the shit, like they look like art installations and kind of
Yeah.
paintings.
Yeah.
Like they're so beautifully choreographed and framed and everything. So they have this almost Renaissance look to them, but like kind of the opposite warmth, the warmth of sort of the high class you feel from Renaissance paintings. It's like replace that with just the most grotesque imagery you can imagine. But like the way it's framed, like that's why I'm saying it like lures you in, because it has this, like even the building itself, the architecture, it's just like, it's very high class, and like it kind of speaks to this like,
I mean, everyone's dressed high class.
Yeah.
Everyone looks really good. Everything is like clean, like Italian classy.
Yeah, clean and well polished and everything, and that's what the whole irony of like they can't even enjoy this wealth that they've kind of accumulated. They just kind of use it to accumulate more greed and just the shit we were talking about. So
yeah,
it's so backwards.
It's like truly like a sickening film, yet it's very important. I kind of realize that now, like why it is important, but like before I didn't. I think I was just kind of like I never got it, but like researching more into like the history and like Pasolini and like what do you like all of that like made me realize like okay, like I get it now.
Yeah,
I get it.
Definitely.
There is something to get from it. You can't just watch it like we just kind of said that already. But
I will say like I do recommend, if you guys haven't seen it, to definitely be prepared for all the trigger warnings and shit we've been saying, but try to think of it more as a critique on fascism than, a typical horror. I don't even call it a horror movie, but
yeah, it's not a horror. Yeah,
torture.
It's not. It's not like yeah.
And I feel like having its name in the Criterion Collection is what piqued my interest initially. Yeah. So I was always just fascinated that it's there, but it is like an archive. Like it should be preserved.
Yeah. It's more of like your own. Yeah. It's like it's you're owning it because like it says something. You know what I mean? Like you're not owning it because you're like, oh, this is a great film. Like we should put on and like watch. Even though like I would watch it again.
I would. I mean, I've watched it 2 times in the past year, so I don't know if I'd watch it anytime soon. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of films that are just more for the representation of having it in my collection than watching it over and over again, because I do think it's one of the most important films ever made, like we've been saying. But and like the way it's constructed is like pretty immaculate. Like even the third act we were talking about, when everyone's getting tortured, we kind of see it from the POV. Is it like the
it's like from outside, like it's from like they're like looking like with these like
it's like they're watching like a stage play or something. Like, they have like these binoculars, and like the camera POV is kind of it's done in the way of binoculars. It's kind of cut off and like a kind of an 8 figure eight sort of thing. And it's really effective, and because you feel this distance from them, it's like, and there's what they're doing is irreparable.
Yeah, there's like no redemption to it. Yeah, it's like when I ended, I remember being like, "Oh, that's the end." Like
you thought there was gonna be some redemption, like maybe.
No, there's no. It's just not. Like a nihilistic sort of whatever, but
completely
it's effective.
Nihilistic,
like it definitely stays with you
for real. I'll never forget my, watching it for the first and second time. So.
Yeah, watching it in the theater with people, like that's weird. Like that's like interesting. But,
it was a good time. I mean, I saw it with a group of friends, so it was shout out to Antonio and Brendan. We had a good time.
Damn, Brendan was there.
Yeah, he was there.
Oh, he was there?
He loved it. We all loved it. We were like, because we had that perception of it before, and we were like, oh man, that was like a lot of artistic merit, and we were contemplating it for a while. So, it'll stick with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I guess.
Yeah, Salo, 120 Days of Salo. Have you guys seen it? I want to watch more Pasolini stuff. Leave a comment below if you've seen his other stuff, or like what you thought of Salo, or like you want to plug your show and stuff. And
yeah, I mean the Cinebums podcast, as you alluded to. Felix has been on many times.
Yeah,
Jack, the other co-host, has been on.
Yeah.
We talk about random things, just like the Medium Cool show, and whatever we feel like talking about. We're probably going to do a Miyazaki-centric episode coming up, and then like best of the year.
Yeah, and best directorial debuts of all time is coming soon, too.
We're trying
to look out for that. Yeah,
we'll
check
do
out
it.
the
We'll do it, yeah.
Podcast.
But yeah, check out the podcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's do it again soon. Like,
hell yeah.
Before the end of the year.
Definitely.
Yeah.